Hi folks, HR Funk here, coming to you today with a scope review, and this review comes about by the good graces of my friend Dan with Bang Steel down in Virginia. And Dan is a person who, when he speaks about long-range precision shooting, I listen, because he runs a course down there at Bang Steel that is tremendous. By the way, if you're looking for a place to get into long-range precision shooting and you're somewhere in the Western Virginia area, look no farther than Bang Steel. In any case, Dan called me up a couple of weeks ago and asked me if I was familiar with Discoveryopt scopes, and I had to say no, I was not. And he proceeded to tell me that they have been testing several of their scopes on some of the rifles they have down there, to include 50 BMG chambered rifles, and the scopes have been holding up very well and performing very well. And he asked if he could put me in contact with the Discoveryopt people to see if they could send me a scope for review. And I said, sure, that sounds fantastic. So a couple of emails later, I ended up with this Discoveryopt. This is a 5 to 25 power first focal plane SFIR rifle scope, and in this video I'm going to be telling you about this scope. We'll head out to the range and see how it performs, and when it's all said and done, you can see if this might be an optic that would meet your needs. So here we go. And let's kick things off with the way you receive the scope, which is in the box. And this is a large box, and the lid doesn't want to come off. There we go. All right. Inside we find a, quality control checklist where all these various things were checked and then signed off on. That's kind of interesting. You don't see that too often with any product. There is a user's manual. There is a card with the technical specs for the scope, a chamois/lens cloth. We have the scope itself and what I assume is a tool for the scope. Scope, of course, is wrapped in plastic and has a sunshade over the ocular lens. We also have the scope rings along with all the necessary mounting hardware, and I can even see a Torx wrench in there. The rear flip-up scope cover. Kind of nice. A lens pen and another small hex wrench in there. And the last thing I see over here, I can't get out. A scope leveling kit. So all of that comes inside the box. So you get a lot coming along with the scope. And I need to double check and make sure I don't have anything left back down inside there. And I don't think I do. So let me get all this moved off to the side and we'll go on. And as everyone can plainly see, the Discoveryopt Gen-2 SFIR scope is now mounted to the rifle that I call my Model 700 HRF. Some of you will remember this rifle from last winter. It started out as a standard Remington 700 varmint, and during the course of a video series, I made several modifications to the rifle and ended up with the one you see here, which, as I said, I call my 700 HRF. In any case, the first thing I'll tell you about this scope is it is a substantial optic. And by substantial, I mean big and heavy. The measurements for this scope are 16.33 inches in length. It is 2.6 inches wide, 2.6 inches high, and it weighs 44.3 ounces, or stated a different way, it weighs more than 2 3/4 pounds. So this is not a lightweight scope that you're going to want to throw onto a rifle that you take with you on a hunting trip back into the mountains where you're going to be hiking miles and miles and miles to get to wherever you're going. This is the type of scope you're going to want to put on a heavy rifle that you shoot from a fixed position, because it's probably going to add a measure of stability just because of its weight, and it also should withstand a lot of heavy use just because it is a heavyweight, heavily built optic. One thing I wish I had done before I mounted the scope is to get a view of these rings. These are impressive rings. The inside of each one of these basically has a mirror polish. If you're like me and you remember the days when people used to have to lap scope rings to make sure that everything was even and there was not pressure on one part of the scope tube that was not on another part or whatever, thanks to modern machining, those days are pretty much gone. And again, these are very impressive rings. Each one has 4 numbered screw holes. You can see them here. They also have the torque spec for the ring caps right here, and I don't think you can see, but on the front is also the torque spec for the cross bolts going through, and I'm just really impressed by those scope rings. I think that's a great touch from Discoveryopt. The only thing I notice, and I'll talk about this later on, is they are a little bit high for this rifle. The Gen-2 SFIR uses a 34mm main tube constructed of aircraft-grade aluminum, and at least partially due to the extra-large diameter of this main tube is the fact that this scope has a total elevation adjustment of 36 mils. So you have a lot of elevation adjustment available in this scope for extreme long-range use. Here's a look at the ocular lens of the SFIR, and this does have a fast focus eyepiece that you can see right here. The surface around the eyepiece is knurled somewhat, so you can get a good grip on there. And it is stiff enough that it should not change inadvertently, but it's not difficult to move either. The magnification ring also has that same texturing that you can see right there, but it has a throw lever as well. The magnification ring is about like, in terms of pressure required to turn it, the same as the fast focus eyepiece. So it takes a little bit of effort to turn that ring, but it should not move when you don't want it to, and that throw lever helps out tremendously. That throw lever, by the way, does appear to be removable, so if you don't want it there, you can remove these 2 star head screws, take the throw lever off, then you'll just have to rely on the texturing on the magnification ring itself. The left side adjustment turret follows the pattern that we've seen with a lot of scopes recently. First off, this houses the battery that powers the illumination for the reticle. Also, the outer portion of this turret, or maybe I should say the outboard portion, is the illumination control. There are 6 brightness levels for that illuminated reticle, and only the center portion of the reticle illuminates. So it does not have an entire illuminated reticle. It doesn't illuminate the entire Christmas tree or anything like that, but just the center portion does. And I have tested it. It is daylight bright. So if you're someone who wants to use an illuminated reticle in bright daylight, this is bright enough to accomplish that. There are also off settings between each intensity brightness setting. So if you want to position this between the setting you want and the next setting, there is an off position there, and then when you turn it to whichever setting you want, it is instantly on that brightness setting, so you don't have to click all the way through each illumination setting to get to the one you want. The inboard portion of the left side turret is the parallax adjustment, and the parallax / focus is adjustable all the way down to 25 meters. So if you want to use this at extremely close range, you can dial that down all the way to that 25 meter setting. And I can tell you from the testing that I've done so far, the settings on here really correspond almost perfectly to the various distances when you're shooting. When I was at 100 yards, I dialed it to 100 yards and I was right on as far as my focus was concerned. Same thing for 200 yards, 300 yards was a little farther. I've not taken it out beyond that yet. 500 yards is the last marking we see, and then it goes to infinity. So good parallax / focus adjustment on that left side turret. The elevation turret, like most of the other features of this scope, is very large. And one of the nice things about the large diameter of this turret is the fact that it requires a little bit more rotation from one click to the next. So it makes each click a little bit more distinct when you are dialing through your elevation adjustments. I like that. I didn't know if I would like that great big turret or not, but it's something that actually works out very well. Also, I'm going to have to change the camera angle just a little bit. I want to show you something else I like about this. For both re-indexing the turret to 0 after you have sighted in the rifle, and also for accessing the 0 stop underneath the elevation turret, all you have to do is remove this one large screw. I mentioned this in another video recently. I like this much better than having the small set screws all the way around the circumference of the turret. Those things are kind of a pain, and especially when you are trying to get everything lined up just perfectly and tighten them back down, they make that a very tedious process. I much prefer this large screw. And also, give me just a moment here, you might recall seeing this tool when I was unboxing things from the package with the scope. That fits perfectly into the groove in the top of the turret there. So you even get a tool. You can use a coin. In fact, when I was out at the range, I forgot to take this with me, of course, and I ended up using a coin. But if you have this, you can use that to take out that big screw, access your 0 stop. And by the way, the 0 stop on this scope is one of the easiest ones that I have ever worked with to set. And basically all you do is remove this big screw, take this off. The 0 stop itself does have 4 set screws around the circumference, but you back those off. Now this is after you have zeroed the scope. Simply slide that collar down to where it's flush against the bottom of the adjustment turret. I just dropped my tool. And then tighten those set screws down again, put the turret back on, tighten the big screw, and your 0 stop is set and your turret is re-indexed to 0. So I like that considerably. A couple of more quick things before we completely leave the elevation turret. First off, it has very large, easy to read numerals as you work your way around the elevation settings. I like that a lot. They are easy to read. And also, there is one set of numerals around the circumference for the first rotation of the turret, and then it picks up again with a second set of numerals for your second rotation. There are, if you can see them down here, small lines to indicate how many rotations you have gone, also to help make sure you keep track of where you are. And of course, if you lose track, you can always dial all the way back down to the 0 stop, then you know you're back to original 0, and you can start your elevation adjustments again. So you have a lot of features there on this turret built in to make this easy to use, and so far I've enjoyed using it quite a bit. And we'll finish off the discussion of the adjustment turrets with the right side windage adjustment, and this is a non-locking turret, so it can potentially be bumped and inadvertently changed, but there's enough resistance there. I would not expect that to happen easily. You would have to bump it against something pretty hard or rub it on something pretty hard to get that to actually change. The markings are for both right and left movement of your shot. This is something I don't think a lot about. When I grab the windage turret, and even the elevation turret for that matter, I think of this basically as being a big bolt. If I turn my bolt clockwise, it's going to move my shot to the left. If I turn my bolt counterclockwise, it's going to pull my shot to the right. So that's just a quick, easy way to remember that. Same thing with elevation. If you turn it clockwise, just like a bolt, that's going to pull the shot down. If you turn it counterclockwise, it's going to push the shot up. You can see here something that I don't care for, and I don't know why manufacturers do this. I told you that I very much like having this big screw in the top of the turret that I can loosen and remove to re-index this to the point of 0. For the windage turret, this one again has the screws around the circumference. I don't like that nearly as well because it becomes very tedious sometimes to get this properly re-indexed to 0 without actually changing your scope setting. But one nice thing about this one is you don't have to take it completely off and then try to get it back on and tighten these screws down. When you loosen all of these screws, and there are 4 of them around the circumference of the windage turret, you can actually turn the turret without removing it from the scope, and it doesn't change the adjustment for your windage. So you just basically rotate this. You won't hear it going click, click, click as you're turning it like you do now. And when you get the 0 marking re-indexed to this point on the scope, all you do is tighten these back down. So I found that to be a little bit easier than I usually experience with scopes that use this type of a windage securing screw arrangement. Both the elevation and windage turrets are calibrated in 1/10 mil adjustments, as you see here. The clicks are tactile and audible. Both of them move 10 mils for one complete revolution of either the elevation or windage turret. And as I said, neither one of these are lockable, so they are subject to potentially being moved if they are bumped or rubbed against something while you are handling the rifle or getting into a position. And there's a look at the 56mm objective lens. This scope does use Japanese-made extra low dispersion glass for both light transmission and image clarity. Before I go on, I want to talk a little bit about some of the accessories that came with this scope. You saw all of these when I was unboxing them a while ago, but I want to make a couple of comments. Now, some of these things I've already mentioned during the review, so I'm not going to talk about them too much more. You do get two plastic flip-up scope covers that you see here. You get a sunshade. I almost never use these things, but if you do use them and you want one, you get one with the scope. There are two inspection sheets that show all of the checks that this scope went through before it was shipped. And they are even dated. They check to see just exactly how much movement there was for the elevation and windage adjustments and made sure that was all within spec. They checked the tracking. They checked basically every aspect of this scope and put a card in with the scope, actually two cards, to show all of these things were done. The rings I mentioned are very high quality. You get a Torx wrench and you also get a couple of extra cap screws in case you lose one. The lens pen is a nice touch. There was another company that used to include these, but you don't see them as much anymore. So if you need to brush off the lens or try to clean off fingerprints or what have you, you have a lens pen for that, as well as a lens cloth. There is a little card that comes along with all of the scope's specifications, and I'll try to hold this up so you can see it. So if there's anything you weren't sure about as far as what the adjustment click rate is or anything, measurements, weights, etc., that's all listed on this card. You get the little hex wrench for various things like adjusting that windage turret. The instruction manual is one of the things that I'm really kind of underwhelmed by. There are a lot of things I like about this scope, but this is another scope that is very complex, and the manual is very, very basic. I don't think it has any information in here about the reticle and how to use it. It doesn't have much talking about the adjustments or just basically how to use the scope. It talks about mounting it, it talks about zeroing. I think there's something in here about bore sighting, but this manual needs to be a lot more comprehensive for people to know how to use this optic. Conversely, something that I was really impressed by was this scope leveling kit that comes along with it. This thing works really well. I was able to level the scope very quickly and very easily using this, and I've talked before that in the past there have been times that I've spent a half an hour, 45 minutes or so going back and forth trying to make sure that I have the reticle perfectly leveled. This thing worked great, so I like that a lot. In fact, I'll probably be using this more in the future with scopes that I get after this. The reticle in this Discoveryopt scope is a mill-based Christmas tree style that matches the adjustment turrets, and rather than try to get you a poor quality image through the scope here in the shop, rather I'm going to flash up an illustration so you can get a better idea of what that reticle looks like. And as you look at the illustration, the highlighted red portion in the very center is the only part of the reticle that actually illuminates. As I said earlier, this is daylight bright. Also, once again, I made a calibrated target and placed it at a distance of 100 yards so I could compare all the elements in the reticle against that target. And when I was able to hold it perfectly still, everything looked just perfect through the scope. So I have no doubt that using the reticle for all the various functions like moving target leads and range estimation and windage and elevation holds, etc., would be perfectly fine. And I'll show you that target now, and then I'll show you some images I was able to get through the scope out at the range. Now, one thing about the images you're going to see, the scope was canted because the rifle was canted. So you'll notice the elements in the reticle don't exactly correspond to the markings on the target in those images. And it's just because I could not keep the rifle perfectly level and still get the images through the scope. So the rifle was canted, the scope was canted, and it looks like things don't line up, but when I was able to hold everything perfectly still, they lined up just fine. And here, once again, for your viewing pleasure, is one of my calibrated targets. The markings on this target are all in 1 mil increments, and I placed this target at 100 yards. So each of those elements you see corresponds to 3.6 inches at 100 yards, and that's what I was checking the reticle against, and as I said, everything looked perfectly fine. Now you'll notice at the very bottom of the target, there's not enough room to extend those lines out as far as I needed to for the full Christmas tree, but I felt this was close enough that I could look at the reticle, look at the elements, and be able to tell that yes, it is graduated truly in 1 mil increments. As indicated on the side of the ocular lens housing, you can see that this is a first focal power scope, meaning the reticle gets larger and smaller as magnification increases and decreases. The good part about that is the elements in the reticle are always true regardless of what magnification setting the scope is on. So I point that out just in case anyone's not familiar with first focal plane. With second focal plane scopes, the reticle is always the same size, so any elements in the reticle are only true at a certain magnification setting. For the images I was able to capture through the scope, I used 5 different magnification settings, and I started out on the lowest setting of 5 power. Then I went through 10 power, 15 power, 20 power, and 25 power. And I'll flash those up on the screen so you can see what they look like. As always, I have to add the caveat that when you're looking through the scope, what you're seeing is a lot better than the images you're seeing on your computer screen right now or your phone screen. When I try to capture those images on camera, the quality is just never as good. But the images are bright, they're clear, and I had no issues whatsoever with the glass quality or the light transmission in bright daylight. I've not tested it in low light yet, but there could be a difference in low light. I'll let you know when I get to that if I see any problems. Upon arriving at the range with the Discoveryopt scope, my first order of business was to establish a 100-yard zero. So I first established a rough zero, then I fired a shot at my Mad Bomber target here at a distance of 100 yards, and my aiming point was the inside corner of his left eye, and the very first shot is the one you can see just outside the outside corner of his left eye. So I made a 1/2 mil correction to the left and fired the second shot, and that looked close enough to me to go on with the rest of the testing. After zeroing this scope, I proceeded to shoot a box test. Now for anyone who hasn't seen that before, I'm firing a series of shots, and for each shot, my point of aim is exactly the same. In this instance, it's the bullseye in the lower left corner of the target you're about to see. After I fire each shot, I change the elevation and/or windage settings of the scope to see if the point of impact moves the proper distance for the setting that I now have on the scope. At the end, I return to the original zero setting and I try to see if the point of impact is going to return to the same place as the first shot that I fired. That sounds more complicated than it actually is. Here's what it looks like. Here we go, 100-yard box test with the Discoveryopt scope. All right. So now we're going to go 1.5 mils left. That should do it. Same point of aim as the last shot. Let's see where this one hits. I'd say that's just about perfect. Now I'm going to come up 30 clicks for 3 mils. Same point of aim. Let's see where this one goes. Now come back to the left, 1.5 mils. Same point of aim. Wow, this thing is doing really well. So let's come back down 3 mils to the original setting. And we're right back to the 0 setting. Last shot. Let's see if it goes right on top of the first. I think it basically went through the same hole. You don't get much better tracking than that, folks. That is outstanding. Here is that target I was using during the box test, and I'm going to make this image larger, so hopefully you can see this better. When I made my first correction after firing this shot, I went 1.5 mils to the right, which would calculate to 5.4 inches at that distance of 100 yards. And as you can see, I came in just shy of that. This is about 5.25 inches. But any deviation on the part of the ammunition or the shooter, i.e. me, also factors in here. So I think this tracking for the windage was pretty good. When I went up 30 clicks, and I was using round measurements, if I wanted to go to the middle of this bullseye up here, and I guess I need to change the camera view again. If I wanted to go to the middle of this bullseye, that would have been more like 28 clicks. But with 30 clicks, that should move the point of impact 10.8 inches at that distance of 100 yards. And once again, when I get my elementary school ruler turned properly here, there's 10.75 inches. That's almost perfectly 10.8 inches going center to center. So very impressive as far as the amount of movement I'm getting in my point of impact when I make those sight corrections. Then I came left 1.5 mils. And we can see, before I even measure that, look at the elevation here, just staying absolutely true. That time we're getting a little under 4.5 inches, but again, any deviation in that shot, if the breeze picked up a little bit more and I was getting a little more wind deflection or anything like that, could have factored in, because we're talking fractions of an inch at this point. Then I came back down 3 mils, and we can see that the two shots are touching. Almost through the exact same hole here. So again, I think that tracking and that adjustment value for each one of the clicks is very, very impressive, particularly for a scope in this price range, but really for any scope. I was kind of blown away by this tracking test, which is why I wanted to spend a little bit more time examining the target so you all would be able to see it. By now, I was feeling pretty confident in the abilities of the Discoveryopt scope and my ability to take advantage of them, so I decided to try a couple of extended range headshots. I backed off to a distance of 200 yards, and once again, firing at my Mad Bomber target, I fired this shot. All right, I'm getting ready for my 200-yard headshot, and of course the wind is picking up as I'm getting ready for this. One thing I've noticed is the parallax adjustment is right on the money for focusing at the various distances. I've been as close as 50 yards, and I'm now back to 200 yards, and every time it has been right even with the indicator mark when I have turned it to that distance for the parallax adjustment. So that's good. And I have also made my elevation correction for 200 yards. And I went with a standard correction, which from 100 yards to 200 yards with 168 grain match grade ammo is 2 minutes of angle. And I'm getting a full value crosswind of about 5 miles an hour. And it's dying down now, so let's see if I can get this shot off. Shots away. And I can see it from here. I think our Mad Bomber would be pretty much done. And then moving back to a distance of 300 yards, I fired this shot. All right, gang, last shot of the day from 300 yards. And the wind is, actually it's in a lull right now. So I'm going to try to get this shot off before it picks back up again. Shots away, and I think our bad guy was still stopped before he could detonate his bomb. So that's 300 yards with the Discoveryopt scope. The sight picture is clear, the adjustments are good. There's really nothing bad that I can say about it so far. At this point, I had one more test I wanted to conduct on the Discoveryopt scope, and I waited till the following day to go back to the range. This time, I wanted to test it for any deviation in point of aim as the magnification was changed from one level to another. So I started out on 25 power, so the highest power setting, and fired one shot at my target at 100 yards. Then I changed it to 20 power and fired another shot. Then 15 power and fired another shot, 10 power, and then 5 power. And then I looked at the target when I was all done, and I will show you an image of that, and I'll also show you where the various shots hit. So here is the 5-shot group that I fired while I was cycling my way through the different magnification levels, and I numbered them in the order that I shot them. So number 1 was the first shot on 25 power, number 2 was the second shot on 20 power, number 3 was the third shot on 15 power, number 4 was the fourth shot on 10 power, and number 5 was the last shot on 5 power. And up until the point that I fired that last shot, I had a group that is about 0.7 minutes of angle center to center. So I was pretty happy with that. And the only reason I think number 5 is outside of the rest of the group just a little bit is because at that low magnification setting, I just could not place my shot as precisely. But I didn't see any deviation at all resulting from changing the magnification levels themselves. The overall group is just over 1 inch center to center. So I thought that was pretty darn good for cycling through all those different magnifications. Another thing I noticed while conducting this test was, unlike some other scopes that I've tested, at the lowest magnification setting of 5 power, the reticle in the Discoveryopt scope was still usable. In this photo, it's difficult to be able to see that, but when you're looking through the scope, it is thick enough even on 5 power to be able to use it. By the way, that is what my 5 power sight picture looked like, and that's why that shot deviated just a little bit from the rest of the group. All in all, for a scope in this price range, the Discoveryopt SFIR has a lot going for it. There are a few things that I can mention here at the end of the video that I noticed while I was using it that were not so great. One of them is the eye relief, and also this is going to play into the exit pupil that I talked about earlier in the video. Some of this is just characteristics of optics, or rifle scopes I should say, in this magnification range. The higher the magnification goes, the more critical some of these things become. In terms of eye relief, on its lowest magnification setting, this scope has an eye relief of 3.4 inches, and at its highest setting, it goes down to 3.3 inches. And I definitely was noticing that I had to make sure that I had my eye in the proper location. But even more critical than that was the exit pupil. And the exit pupil on the highest magnification is only 2.2 millimeters. and I was really noticing that I had to keep my eye just perfectly aligned behind the scope at that magnification setting of 25 power in order to get a good clear image in the ocular lens. Now if I turn the magnification down, that became much less critical, and I think some of this might be exacerbated by these rings, which, as much as I like them, are a little bit high for this particular rifle. If you have a rifle with an adjustable comb, and this is not really adjustable, it's replaceable, but if you have a rifle with an adjustable comb, this would probably be not so much of an issue, because you could just raise the comb of your rifle slightly to get that perfect eye position for this ocular lens. But with my rifle, I did notice that, and it was not difficult to use, but just be aware of that it is very critical to get the perfect eye position behind this scope. Also, and once again, this is not exclusive to Discoveryopt scopes, but the flip-up scope covers work okay. The rear ocular lens cover doesn't fit tremendously tight, and there was one point while I was using the scope out on the range, I noticed that this was missing and I had to look around for it. Turns out that when I had put it in my Jeep and taken it back out, apparently I bumped this against the seat or something and this scope cover fell off. So just be aware of that. The front cover seems to fit a little bit tighter. I'm not sure how durable they're going to be, but they're not the absolute highest quality scope covers you can get. Again, we're talking about a $300 scope, not a $3,000 scope. The final thing that I'll mention is just the overall size and weight of this scope. As I said, it is a substantial optic. And if I'm using it on this rifle, firing from a fixed position as I was doing on the range during the time that I was testing this, then that's not really an issue. But I would not use this on a hunting rifle, and even on a tactical rifle, having gotten myself into places and had to literally drag rifles along with me and fight through brush and everything else, I don't know that I would want a scope this big and heavy on there. It's certainly going to work very well when you are shooting, but getting it to where you're going to be shooting from could be a little bit more of an issue. On the plus side, as I said, the glass is very good, the image quality is very good. At the absolute highest magnifications, I was not noticing the image wash out at all. I wasn't getting that milky look to the image that we used to see with lower quality, high magnification optics. So all in all, I think the glass, the image, and the mechanical characteristics of this scope are very good. Obviously, the price is very good, and it has a lifetime warranty from Discoveryopt, so you have that going for you as well. With a value price scope like the Discoveryopt SFIR, the question always comes up, is this scope as durable as a more expensive scope? Will it last as long as a more expensive scope? And I always have to say, I don't know. That would take a lot more extensive testing over a greater period of time to be able to answer that question one way or another. But since Dan has told me that they have been testing these scopes for a while down at Bang Steel, they've been using them on rifles chambered for the 50 BMG cartridge, and they've been using them at those extended distances that they always shoot down there, and the scopes have been performing very well, I would say odds are you're probably not going to have an issue with the Discoveryopt scopes, and if you do, as I said a moment ago, they have a lifetime warranty. I want to say thanks to Dan for putting me in contact with the Discoveryopt scope folks. And also thanks to all of you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by hrfunk.com, check out all the news and information there, check out the product information page for all the links to products that I've reviewed here on the channel, and also for the discount codes that are there. See you next time, folks, and until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.